Hello and welcome to By the Book, the podcast for women in their second season navigating reinvention, calling, business and the sacred transitions of midlife. I'm Johanne Hewlett and I'll be helping you build your God-led business with faith, wisdom and confidence. So let's begin. By the book. But before we begin properly today, I want to take a moment just to explain what's happening this January on the By the Book podcast. Over the next few episodes, we're entering a short January series called the January Reset, and it's about living and working under God's order, not hustle. This isn't a season about rushing forward or making big plans. It's not about setting goals or forcing clarity. It's about slowing down just enough to return to centre, to God's order, God's pace, and God's definition of faithfulness before we decide what comes next. So if you're listening and you sense a quiet stirring rather than a loud call to action, you're actually where you need to be. Now, there's a moment that comes for many women somewhere in midlife, and it often arrives quietly. Nothing has fallen apart. You haven't walked away from your faith. You haven't made any dramatic mistakes, but something feels off. Not wrong enough to panic, not obvious enough to explain, just something misaligned. And the unsettling thing is that you often can't point to a single decision where you went astray or a time that it actually happened. That's because most drift in midlife doesn't happen through rebellion. It happens through absorption. Over time, we absorb pressure, we absorb pace, we absorb expectations, including Christianized ones. We absorb ideas about productivity, usefulness, and responsibility. And we learn how to keep things going, how to manage, how to cope, how to carry weight. And none of those things are sinful or wrong, but gradually, without noticing, they can become or begin to organise our lives more than God does. And that's a drift. That's drift, not turning away, just slowly rotating off centre. And midlife is particularly vulnerable for this kind of drift because it's often a season of competence. By now you know how to survive, you know how to make things work, and you know how to carry responsibility without falling apart. But survival skills, if we're not careful, they can quietly become governing principles. We start making decisions based on what's required, what's urgent, what can't be dropped, rather than what God is actually ordering in this season. And slowly, faith can become functional, still present, still sincere, but no longer central. And this is why so many Christian women reach midlife feeling unsettled without really knowing why. They still believe, they still pray, they still want to honour God, but decisions begin to be shaped more by the pressure and not the peace, by urgency rather than obedience, by fear of falling behind rather than trust in God's timing. That's not failure, it's just misalignment. Now, Scripture shows us again and again that God is deeply concerned about order, not order as control, but order as alignment. Before Abraham moves, God speaks. Before Moses leads, God reveals himself. Before David reigns, he spends years being formed. And before Jesus begins his ministry, he withdraws, fasts, and submits. God never rushes people into motion without first anchoring them. And when we reverse that order, when we act before we're aligned, we will feel it. Anxiety rises, surviving and striving creeps in, and peace begins to fade. And now one of the lies we've absorbed from the wider culture is that movement equals faithfulness. But Scripture doesn't teach that. It teaches that obedience flows from alignment, not urgency. And midlife is often the moment God invites us to reorder, not because we've failed, but because what worked before can't really sustain what comes next. If you're listening today and thinking, I feel called but cautious, or I sense change but I'm not really ready to rush, or I don't want to build the same way again, that doesn't mean you're confused. It actually means you're discerning. This episode isn't about asking you to make decisions. It's asking you to notice, to gently ask yourself where pressure has replaced peace, where pace has overtaken prayer, where responsibility has crowded out attentiveness to God, not with judgment, but with honesty. Because drift is not something to be ashamed of, it's something to be corrected. And correction begins with awareness. So as we move through this January reset, we're not trying to push forward, we're helping you stand right again. Over the next episodes or few over this month, we'll talk about the difference between calling and assignment, why God establishes order before output, how obedience works without guarantees, and what faithfulness actually looks like in a second season. No rushing, no forcing, no pressure to perform, just a return to God's order, so that whatever you build next is built with peace and with Him. Before we go any further, I want to gently name something. And this conversation about drift and misalignment and quiet spiritual fatigue is one of the reasons I wrote my book, By the Book. Not because women lack faith or effort, but because so many of us have been sincerely faithful while slowly absorbing pressures that were never meant to shape our lives. The book isn't about doing more or fixing yourself or starting again. It's about returning to God's order, learning how to live and work under His authority rather than cultural urgency or religious expectation. So if today's episode is stirring something you've sensed for a while but haven't had the words for, know that you're not alone and there is a way back to the centre. And if you're ready to go deeper right now, I created 2 powerful courses to walk this journey with you, whatever season you're in. The links are in the show notes, or simply visit my website, johewhewlettauthor.com, where you can find out more about the courses and the book. Until next time, go gently, go boldly, and go by the book.